Those who face eternity easily forget what a lifetime means, what an ending means.
You know it doesn't have to be this way.
No, Kunavine, it does. They need me.
Welcome, End of Dragons Daily 64. The big topic today is Chrono. Not Chrono, Mesmer, the new Mesmer Elite specialization for Cantha. I've been gathering message from you guys about that. The footage in the background isn't really going to be related. It's going to be the Super Adventure Box. Kind of swamped under with a billion different things going on in game at the moment. There's the daily DRMs, there's the new Scrit stuff and killing Dredge and helping them out. There's the Super Adventure Box and its dailies. There's the regular daily. There's the World vs. World Diamond chest that I'm continuing to get, hoping to get that backpack. I'm thinking about getting the Byzantium chest in the PvP League as well, now that all that balance has come in. It's just kind of a crazy time if you're into the game at the moment and working on a lot of projects. There's so much you could be doing right here, right now. I felt the same with the last festival that came out as well. Oh, when Lunar New Year was here, but at least Lunar New Year is very simple. It's just buy a couple of tickets and then you're basically done for the day. But so, yeah, let's jump on with Mesmer stuff. I want to open up as I did with the previous Elite specialization and give you guys just some of my overarching ideas at the beginning, and then we'll go over some of the walls of text you've all submitted. And I think the crucial thing for ArenaNet to think about on this Elite spec is actually the mechanical side rather than theme. I think there's a lot of good themes that you guys have submitted here that they can run with. Inspiration for like what kind of banding together concepts I think is very easy to find. However, Mesmer, how it works with phantasms and clones and shatters is kind of a very precise, intricate thing. And what we've seen happen so far for major mechanic is they've actually been kind of hands-off. You know, with Chrono, they basically just added Continuum Split. Much later during the Path of Fire era, they have now gone back and updated all the shatters, so it feels a bit different. But the new Chrono shatters are very similar to the original ones. And then for Mirage, yeah, they kind of had this new idea of replacing the dodge roll, which I think was a very brave idea, and we've seen, you know, they had to do dramatic balance on that as well, particularly in the competitive formats ever since doing it. But it didn't really fundamentally change how it feels to be a Mesmer. You're still looking at kind of those same shatters. Compare that to, say, how different it feels to be a Hollow to a Scrapper, or how different it feels to be a Berserker to a Spellbreaker. And I'm really wondering what that big substantive thing that they can do for this next spec. The other thing is the Mirage kind of did add some interesting new ideas about like hiding as a clone and like the deceit side of the game, which now I kind of feel like steps on the toes of some of my other ideas for mechanics. So I haven't really nailed anything down, but my gut is to say the devs should look at the way that phantasms work. You know, we had the Phantasm rework during the POF era, where they're not summoned entities that continue striking, they disappear. Maybe something that reverts us back to the old Phantasm behavior, but with a nice new twist and something decent on top would be cool. But really, I've only skimmed the idea in my mind for now. The other thing I'd like to say is the weapon I've always wanted for Mesmer really is Dagger. Back at launch, there was kind of an interesting swap that occurred as far as weapon accessibility for two of the light armor characters. It happened that the Mesmer got Greatsword and the Necromancer got Dagger, and they always seemed like they could have been swapped to me. Necro could have always had Greatsword, and Mesmer, you know, could have always had Dagger, being the sneaky thing that gets up close and personal, is kind of like the magical thief in some ways. So maybe we could see something done with that. Obviously, Necro did end up getting Greatsword immediately with its first Elite spec. Maybe they go further. And look, for what it's worth, I think Dagger and like Blood Sacrifice and Ritual and all that kind of stuff works on the Necro too. It's just, come on man, Mesmer without Dagger, it feels somehow incomplete to me. First message here from Demacian Weevil, who, this isn't about the Mesmer, but I had to give them their moment, was talking about the discussion I had with Boots. What kind of skills could NPC representatives of the Assassin class do? And they say, Shadow Form, me literally screaming at the top of my lungs if they could hear me if I was loud enough. Shadow Form, Shadow Form, Shadow Form. And Aaron says, I don't know if ArenaNet wants to reopen that Pandora's box. I fully expect it to be a shadow of its former self. They already struggled to balance Chrono's distortion in Guild Wars 2. And Weevil says, this was about what iconic skills you could give to NPCs. Maybe while in shadow form they take no damage, but a CC bar, they are quite squishy afterwards. No, I agree. So people that are out of the loop, there was an extremely powerful assassin ability in the first game that essentially made you invulnerable. And if you stacked the right skills in the right way and the right equipment, you could maintain it permanently. So it was a big investment to maintain it permanently, but I am talking about like a legitimate invulnerability build, and this opened up a lot of running and a lot of solo clears and a lot of gimmicky stuff. And the devs kind of reworked Shadow Form in a big way at least twice, and it's kind of always been this big question mark, should ArenaNet have ever gone for that? That's Pandora's box. It's funny, I was told on a stream recently that there's actually a Revenant build out there right now that can stack 100% damage reduction, and you have to invest a lot into it, but it can do it. So there's kind of a Guild Wars 2 Shadow Form out there at the moment. The games are structured very differently though, so the power of that, you know, I think we can call into question in some ways. Also, I think there is a little bit of downtime on the Rev 1. I think when you go into a certain legend, you drop to like 84% damage mitigation. In any case, all that stuff aside, yeah, the NPCs could use this. They totally could. And some kind of shadow form that looks like a dark black shroud, almost like a kind of necromancy plague form looking thing I'm imagining in my mind, I think could totally work. And not only can I imagine just random NPCs running around using something like that, but it could even kind of function in the story to a certain degree. They introduce some big hero who is an assassin and relies on such techniques. I'd like to see it, for sure. It would be a really major callback, because it's a very iconic skill from the original that doesn't have a place in the sequel yet. So many other things do. Shadow Form deserves to be there. Next, we've got Marnix Peters, who says, the Bell Toller, named to be approved by the Spud Police. This is kind of similar to the Kirin Caller or whatever we had before. I think that's a weird name. As a visual callback to the cinematic trailer of Factions, this Mesmer uses a hammer to smash into a bell and rain sound attacks from a tactical position on the battlefield. It serves mainly as a support function, but can deal some great CC and big blows with its 5-skill Bell Blast. Your clones and phantasms are now replaced with chimes and bells. You gain the utility skills Preparations, all sound oriented. It's basically a bard, but with a hammer and a bell. The elite skill is an elite preparation, which has you invoke your allies with the Song of High G, the Phoenix boss in Napui Quarter. High G has an elite skill that is only applicable to humans, so I'm gonna skip that potential overlap. Well, yeah, we're not gonna see any design that only works for one race. I do actually have a few issues with this. I like the idea, but I think if they're gonna do something that's like a bard, they should call it a bard, because people will respond. You know, casual, people who don't play this MMO, people who are looking for reasons to get invested, people that will browse through the bullet points and see what new classes are available, so to speak, with the expansion. If you're going to try and make a bard, call it a bard, and allow yourself to reap the benefits of that. The Bell Toller, I think, is just a bit obscure, doesn't really have that draw. And then what you're doing is you're saying, well, we can't really have a bard after the Bell Toller's in, because it already covers all of that territory, so to speak. And I think that's just messy. It's not necessarily a good idea. The idea of doing a hammer on a Mesmer is a fun one. It's kind of a bit classically big control-oriented thing, and I can kind of see that working out. A ranged hammer as well on a class that's not just Revenant works, and if you think about the way that Rev uses ranged hammer, it's very DPS-y kind of thing. So ranged CC is obviously a very powerful notion, but then we are talking about Mesmer, and if control is any class's domain, surely it's the Mesmer's one. So I can totally see this, and I'd be happy to give up with a dagger, at least for that kind of weapon. And the whole ringing the bell thing can still be a theme, even if you call it a proper bard, right? The idea that all clones and phantasms are replaced with chimes and bells. Now, you write just, what, 7 words there and then leave it? That's a crazy thing you just said. That's a very complicated, wild idea. So what you're talking about, going back to every single weapon skill that is a phantasm, the existing phantasm utilities, reworking all of them, every trait that interacts with a phantasm, and don't forget there's a bunch of those too, or even some traits that summon them, like the Inspiration Grandmaster. This is a lot of work, but I kind of like what you're getting at. I like the idea of when I summon it, it's like a little magical bell that's around with me. And now maybe when I use the shatters, what those shatters are doing is ringing those bells that would be clones, and they break and they disappear in the same way and provide an effect. But, you know, it's not this weird character that runs over and shatters and breaks. It's a little bell that rings. And I can even imagine it's sounding quite nice. You know, that might seem a bit stupid, but I remember when they announced the chrono and the tick-tock sound effect of all the wells on the floor and stuff really being kind of an interesting thing to a lot of people. Leaning into the sound with this, where the different shatter you use plays a different chime, or the different phantasms and clones when they break and despawn make different sounds too, it could work. I could kind of see something there, but I think we need to flesh it out a bit more, don't we? Night Sky Seraph says, Mesmer, my heart and soul since day one, I've been waiting for this. At the absolute top of my list would be a Siren elite spec. Out of Water Trident. I like this weapon suggestion. Not enough people are talking about that because I do think that should be a big thing for this X-Pack. Watery themed as it is. Bring back Hexes. Have an ability to charm creatures to temporarily fight for you. The shatter spells could become 4 different songs or siren wails that create persistent effects in areas around your illusions for a certain time, as a variant on the bursty nature of how they're now used. Would give the spec a distinct feel of fighting alongside your illusions for extended periods of time, rather than quickly cycling through them and recreating them as most Mesmer builds do now. I would love to see Migraine come back, possibly as the elite skill, with its heavy health degen and skill control. Hold on, isn't Migraine the name of a GM already? Am I imagining that? Am I crazy? A variant on this I'd like to see working really well would be for the Mesmer to take one of the iconic Bard role. Short bow played like a harp, AoE basic attack chain as you play damaging chords again in a persistent area of boons and debuffs around you and your illusions based on songs you play, and some heavy psychic spike of damage as they wield in their typical D&D kit. Would give the Mesmer a definitive range supporting identity option with plenty of tools to fend for themselves if needed. I think this is all pretty on the money. Again, we're looking at a significant rework to the way that phantasms and clones operate if you want them to feel like persistent things. It's weird because what you're suggesting actually would feel a bit like Scourge Shades to a certain degree. If they're pulsing AoEs, I'm assuming they're not also running around all the time while doing it, so maybe they're stationary while they pulse their AoE or whatever, and all of a sudden you are in this kind of very shady sort of situation. It's funny because the themes you're going with is like all this music and bardish stuff, but I actually think mechanically what you're creating here is a summoner. And I do think that there's space for a summoner coming out of the Mesmer as a profession. I also think Ellie is somewhat viable for that. You know, they conjure their allies in the case of that one becoming a summoner. So mechanically, I actually think this is better married to a different theme, but it works. And yeah, I'm not too excited about the idea of short bow, but the idea of playing it like a harp, utilizing it in a new way is definitely great. And as I already said, I think Water Trident's a brilliant one. The idea of bringing back Hexes, I could see like a skill category, like a new type of utility skill or a new type of applicable effect called a hex. I can kind of see that coming in, but I don't think that they'll ever bring back hexes in as much as the game system existed in Guild Wars 1. Like, they'll do it as a callback and something superficial, but they won't go full with it. For people who don't know this story, in Guild Wars 2, we obviously have boons and conditions. There aren't many to learn, and once you've learned them all, you know like a good 85% plus of all the combat interactions in the game. There's only a few other things on top that you have to learn, like banners and stuff like that. In Guild Wars 1, everything was unique. There wasn't like a unifying set that made the game easier to manage and figure out. Everything was unique. So all the different casted debuffs were just called hexes. They were like that game's version of conditions, and you had to know every icon, and you had to spend time mousing over all of them to figure out what the effect was, which was completely chaotic and crazy if you were trying to do it in the middle of some fights and maybe it was a very short-lasting hex. The devs deliberately turned their back on that idea when they went to Guild Wars 2, and I don't think that they should just reverse that arbitrarily now with End of Dragons. We've seen them arbitrarily reverse on decent 2012 decisions before, even with Mesmer, like the introduction of Alacrity. That was a line they swore they'd never cross, a line in the sand that people couldn't affect cooldowns anymore, and then Alacrity came in. So it wouldn't surprise me if the devs U-turned again, but I really think that they should leave hexes as hexes really are in the past and maybe do a bit of a callback. You've actually already seen they did it a few times in the game. There are hexes every now and then. You guys might remember fighting alongside Livia/Kerida at the end of Season 3. She uses the Mesmer Hex Fragility, exactly as it works in Guild Wars 1, as it's called in Guild Wars 1, with the icon in Guild Wars 1, directly ported into Guild Wars 2. She uses Fragility. And hey, maybe that's been in the waiting for an ability in one of these new elite specs. Could have been on the Mirage. It didn't end up there in the end, did it? Maybe now. Captain Bucky 33 says they want to see the Clairvoyant with Shroud as their effect. Transfers conditions and or portions of incoming damage to clones, access to psychic skills while in Shroud. So this is actually something of like a tanky idea, I guess, if you're transferring your stuff over to your allies. We know that they've done this at several times in the past in the engine, like when you're a ranger, you can transfer stuff to your allies. So maybe they'll do this. I especially like the idea of the Mesmer getting a Shroud because so many other classes have that kind of experience now. You know, the Photon Forge experience. Press a button, get a bunch of new skills. Mesmer still doesn't, and that's exactly what I mean by, like, the existing specs feel the same. It's the same kind of F abilities. It's the same Conjure and Shatter playstyle. Adding a whole Shroud and taking the Shatters away completely might be nice. It's difficult because you got to compensate Mesmers really nicely if you're going to get rid of Distortion for them, right? As we've seen in the past with some of their tinkering with the way that Chrono works. I also like the idea of Clairvoyant as a name, just because I feel like Aurene and the conclusion of Glint's legacy and all that stuff is going to be a big thing in this story. And if the End of Dragons results in all this power being evenly distributed around the world, does that mean that the ideas of like prophetic capabilities and future seeing and stuff like that is also somehow distributed amongst the masses? Maybe that's where the Clairvoyants come from. You know how they sort of semi-justified the Revenant's existence by tying it to contemporary story? Maybe they'll do something here and yeah, Clairvoyants will be a part of End of Dragons and they have a really good reason as for why as well. You know, I'm talking about stuff that would probably happen at the very end of the X-Pack and we would have been playing a Clairvoyant the whole way through, so maybe it doesn't work, but there could be a middle ground there. Malisaba says, I love the idea of a Gung Fu theme with the Mesmer. Main hand, pistol, call it a Spellslinger. Mesmer being one of the fancy, flashy animation core professions seems too perfect. We already have Chrono doing a lot of power damage, but it's very spiky. Listen, guys, a lot of you guys are trying to put, like, a mechanical role or idea on these things. I really don't think ArenaNet will be doing that. It's not right to say Chrono is exclusively spiky damage. It's just that's how it's ended up feeling in certain metas. You know, it wouldn't be fair to call a Mirage a Condi spec either, when there's, like, Infinite Horizon Greatsword variants out there. I don't think we really should speculate about the elite specialization along these rigid lines, because I don't think that's what the studio will do. And I don't think they're going to try and predict what ways these elite specs will be used either. Anyway, I'd like the Spellslinger to be more of a sustained DPS with an AoE focus. I also want to see a real shake-up in what the Shatters do. Chrono Mirage both feel so similar to Core, with the exception of Continuum Split. I think the Warrior's Adrenaline and Burst mechanic could mesh really well with how clones already function. For example, if you shatter one clone, you get a small AoE, some Condi clear, 2 clones rips boons, does signal target damage, 3 clones is a short evade, invuln, and a massive AoE burst. I don't see it changing with weapon selection the way Warrior does, so it could be designed with more of a burst shatter as well. Spellslinger could gain access to cantrips for a mix of extra CC options or slippery defensive maneuvers. For the weapon, a simple 1-2-3 auto attack chain with a boon or condition at the end, a big shot linear AoE that spawns the clone, and a proximity based AoE all on relatively short cooldown sound fun. As much as I want to see a bard spec for Mesmer, I desperately want a cool dual pistol spec akin to the gunslinging classes, flipping around, raining bullets in your average Korean MMO. Smiley face. So I found it interesting you actually wrote out what you think the weapon skill should be. I find that to be such a tedious part now of thinking of new elite specializations. You know, this is the 3rd cycle of this. This is the 3rd expansion where I've been sitting here wondering what they might do. And, you know, a lot of people I think are interested in, like, the flavor of the weapon. Like, a lot of you guys will say, oh, I want to see a short bow, or I want to see a trident, or whatever. And to actually go down and sit down and write out exactly how they work and how that then meshes with everything else the class already does and doesn't overlap too much and stuff. Oof, I credit you for that. I also credit you just for the idea of a Spellslinger. See, what I think a lot of people forget, and I've always been a big booster of, is Mesmer in Guild Wars 1's big identity was that of a fast caster. You know, Guild Wars 1 had this idea where you could multi-profession, so you could take Mesmer primary and now you could be doing elementalist stuff really quickly. Not as powerfully, but really quickly. Or monk stuff quickly. Or you could be summoning necro minions quickly. That was so cool. That was actually what drew me to being a Mesmer main in the original game. And so far in Guild Wars 2, I haven't really seen that. Yeah, you kind of get the double casting idea from Chrono. in that you cast, you leave continuum split, and then you do it again. But that doesn't really feel like that's the essence of the spec, does it? So I'm all for a Spellslinger. I think cantrips are a brilliant thing to pair with it too, even if they already kind of feel like they have cantrips. I mean, Lightning Flash, an LE cantrip, an instant activation spell. Let's be real. Is it really that different to Blink? Is it really that different to Illusory Ambush? Like, it's kind of a non-classification in some ways, but I think that'll work super well. If you want to tie that with a main hand pistol, I'm all for that as well. You know, maybe they add their bouncing bullets unload back and make all the thieves desperately sad and annoyed that a new class has got what they once had. That'd be brilliant. So guys, I do still have 5 more totally unique, different, I keep saying Chrono, Mesmer concepts that I do want to run through with you guys, but I'm running out of time to record here. This isn't me trying to keep it bite-sized today. This is that I'm actually running out of time to record. So I will see you hopefully early tomorrow, where I'll wrap through these ones as well. I've got a bunch of other great commentary from you guys on the other videos we've done recently, so we'll get a generic miscellaneous Cantha topic out there. Please keep dropping the comments. Thank you for all your support. Let me know if you think I've got a terrible take here. I can take it. And also thank you to everybody who's continuing to join the guild. Remember, we are recruiting constantly and continually right up until End of Dragons comes out. You've probably been noticing in the video footage in the background lately, the guild chats are really starting to pop and it's brilliant, and I just want to keep encouraging it. So if you like the sound of that, hit up the Discord link in the description down below, and I'll see you next time, everybody. Thanks for watching.